Welcome to the Get Loved Up podcast. I'm Koya Webb, founder of Get Loved Up, where we inspire you to love yourself more, love others more, and love the planet more. Each week, I'll interview a special guest who will share their insights on how they practice daily self-care, tackle tough challenges in life, and thrive in the world one breath at a time. You will be inspired to take control of your life as you heal yourself mentally, spiritually, and physically, and create a reality in alignment with your deepest passions. Let's get loved up. Everybody's searching for something to fill that empty space. Zal, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Wonderful to hear and wonderful to have you. I am so excited with how you've been building community and just fiercely stepping into your power. I've only known you, I think, for 2 years now. And I remember... Has it even been 2 years?
Yeah, well, 2020 has been like 10 years in one, but yeah.
That's exactly how I feel. So I love how you just own your power and you take up space in a beautiful way. My most memorable moment was when you led a sound healing session, and I was so inspired by you that I actually went out and got similar instruments, but the way you really helped me feel. And I think a lot of healing is around feeling. So can you tell me a little bit about how you really came into your own, how you really discovered, and I know you're always rediscovering who you are, hence the new name, which I absolutely love. But can you talk a little bit about your journey and how you really discovered your full expression and coming into this powerful expressingness and beingness?
Sure. Absolutely. You know, it's one of those things that once you really come into yourself, you realize how long you've actually been doing it for. You know, there's this period of time where it starts to be very intentional and systematic, where you start to like really commit to your practice. But then as you commit to your practice, I think you look back and you're like, oh, I've been doing this work my whole life. You know, I started this when I was a kid, and this one thing here, this one experience there really changed things for me. So as I've gotten older, I look back at like various moments of my childhood. I'm like, okay, this actually started like way back when. Like my healing journey started way back when, even before I understood that that's what I was doing. And that's been a cool thing to sort of sit with more recently. But in terms of my committed practice, it really started in 2017. And that is when like I sort of realized, okay, in a few years, I'm going to be turning 30. I've got to like be really clear about what it is that I'm doing. And I can't just keep just testing things out. I've got a very Sagittarian vibe sometimes. I'm a Sagittarius rising and I get bored easily. So for like the first chunk of my 20s, I would stay at a job for a year and leave and find another job and get bored and then leave. And I was just doing a lot of testing things out, but I wasn't really committing to anything. And 2017 is when that really shifted. And that's when I committed to a personal yoga practice. And I started going to class regularly, and I started doing my own home challenges and waking up and committing just to myself. And that felt really good because I was starting to really start to understand the sensations in my body. And it wasn't 100% clear, but what was clear was that I needed a shift, that I needed to find the right teacher to help me maneuver within that shift. And the right teacher came along. I found Tracy Stanley, and in 2018, I started my yoga teacher training, and I did a Yoga Nidra training, and then I also started my training in Reiki. And slowly but surely, this was also happening. If you're into astrology, this was all happening in my Saturn return. And that was all, it was really a process of learning to let go of all of the layers that I had put on that were really not me, that were really not for myself. And the spiritual practice became so important in that in-between time when I was letting things go, but didn't necessarily know yet what I was replacing things with. And I was having to sit in that openness, kind of in that expanse and in that abyss, and still feel good enough, and still feel whole, and not be guided by the fear, but by the courage. So a lot of reading, a lot of self-study, and then eventually just starting to put one foot in front of the other and have the courage to decide that the way that I wanted to be a teacher, because I was a classroom teacher before. And so I was kind of in my role, but like in the wrong context. And I slowly realized I still wanted to be a teacher, but I really wanted that teaching to be in the context of spirit and healing and energy work. And at the intersection of anti-racism and decolonization and anti-oppression, and really starting to help people like me see ourselves in like a pre-colonial, even more, which felt more important to me, like in an ancestral way, it felt more important to me than anti-colonial or decolonial or anti-racism, which is very much operating in opposition to something, and trying to find where it is that we're operating from rather than what I'm operating against. And to really step into my power from that place. And that is when I started to be a lot more committed to ancestry work and altar work and spirit channeling and sound healing as well. And starting to really tap into what it means to be made of vibration. Absolutely. And what it means to be holy. Yeah, and it's a forever journey, and it's uncovered. I just kind of keep peeling off the layers and getting more and more confident. And in doing so, you know, I really find the community that I'm meant to be a part of. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. I love that you said where I'm operating from versus being in opposition to something. Can you dive a little bit deeper about where you're operating from and that vibration that feeds you, where that's coming from?
Yeah, it definitely comes from my experience having multiple marginalized and minoritized identities. And so as a Black person, as a queer person, as a trans person, I feel like I've often had this perspective on things that people who are a little bit more socially protected don't necessarily have. And I think for a long time, I experienced that vulnerability as a need to really sort of close things off and protect myself. And doing that through creating various layers of, you know, just being who I thought other people wanted me to be. And so that led to me being a person that really came from a place of defensiveness and fear, and sort of coming to understand that through self-study and yoga and Reiki, I was able to let those go and start to come from a place of feeling really whole and knowing that I'm inherently divine, that I'm inherently worthy, I'm intrinsically worthy. I don't have to prove myself, and that I am an expression of divinity, and that all of my intersections are actually gifts and not burdens. And though many people in society will still treat me as such, me being able to really root myself in that reality that I am an expression of the divine as I am, and that living fully as that expression is the only way that I can actually ever experience liberation. And so I'm really coming from this commitment to liberation because I know how devastating it is to operate in a world that is oppressing you. But also knowing that liberation is my own and it comes from the inside out. rather than something that somebody can give me. And so because of that, I've also come from this place of relational dynamics, like really learning how to become more emotionally intelligent, more aligned with my dharma or my soul purpose, and having everything that I do come into alignment with purpose, so that is where that's what directs all of my decision making. And when I do that, I see that everything starts to just fall into place, and the right teachers and the right students arrive at the right time. And it feels better. And I also feel so much more open to the wisdom of my ancestors when I come from that place, rather than being hyper focused on my material experiences, even though those are important to focus on because they still need dismantling, but they really can't be dismantled if I'm not right. If I haven't gotten right within.
Right. And what does that look like? What does getting right look like? Because I feel like you said a couple of things that I wanted to kind of dive deeper into, which is purpose. And I watched Soul. I don't know if you've seen that yet.
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh,
but I'm glad. I know my partner and I, it's on the list.
But really talking a little bit more about what purpose means to you, and what also that divine alignment with purpose, because I think a lot of people, especially in this day and age when it's all about like find your purpose, live your purpose, a lot of people feel like, well, I don't know what my purpose is. And does a person need a specific person or purpose to be valid?
Well, in the lineage that I practice, which is the lineage of Sri Vidya in yoga, the idea is that everybody is born with a purpose. And that purpose is attached to your soul, which means it stays with you in whatever body you are in, or whatever iteration, whatever lifetime you're in, right? And so it's something that never leaves you. And therefore, purpose is not something that you have to find. It's something that you simply have to remember because you're born with it. And I think all of us are very aware of our purpose at very, very young ages. But sometimes those purposes are not like what our parents want, or what fits into the school setting, or what will end up being profitable. And so we're shamed or guilt tripped or whatever into burying it and ignoring it and doing what we need to do to feel safe in our immediate environment, to please our parents, to please our teachers, things like that. Because we are social beings, and at the end of the day, feeling loved and desired and wanted is something that we do choose when we're young as a way of feeling safe. And so if you're feeling disconnected from purpose, it may be that you're still choosing that safety and still choosing other people's perceptions over you over remembering yourself. And so I find that it really helps to go back into your childhood and to think about those things that you've always wanted to do. That, like, no matter how much you've grown up, no matter how much your circumstances have changed, you always wish you could do that thing. You always wish you could just try it, start it. Even if you fail, you would like to know what it feels like to chart that course or start that path. That no matter how much money you make, you don't feel fulfilled if you haven't, tested those waters. And it's not necessarily career. It's the way that purpose works. It's specific, but also broad enough that you can achieve that purpose no matter what. No matter what relationship you're in, no matter what job you're in, no matter what's going on in your life, whether COVID, or something else totally does a 360 on or a 180 on your year. you can pivot in such a way that you're still coming back to this purpose. And for me, that very much looks like nourishing the roots that really bear the fruits of liberation and freedom. So for me, that looks like finding out what are those root level things that keep people from feeling free, right? That keep them from feeling whole, that keep them from feeling worthy. And then nourishing and offering the kind of sacred community and practices that allows them to let go of those beliefs and thoughts and feelings that make them feel like they're not worthy or like they can't be complete, right? And then in the process of that, helping people understand that they're already free, right? From the inside out, that their own capacity to love themselves is enough, that at some point it has to be enough, right? If you're going to be in healthy relationships, right? You've got to start with yourself. Connecting with nature, right? Learning to really trust yourself. And in doing so, become more and more able to divest from the systems of harm that we are wrapped up within.
Absolutely. I think that's beautiful. And I think anyone listening can really feel your passion for liberation. And can you give us just some tips, if you will, on someone that is feeling stuck?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of ways. I always say this, you've got to have multiple people that you go to, right? Multiple teachers, because they're going to give you different kinds of tips and tricks. And so I always like to give people like my positionality, like where it is that I'm coming from, so you understand why it is that I might give you that particular type of tip or trick. And again, you can tell that I'm really into astrology. And so I use those references a lot. And I've got a lot of Capricorn. I have 5 planets in Capricorn, and those are in my second house in my chart. So if you don't know anything about birth charts, that's fine. But basically what that means is that I have a lot of this energy around structure and order and planning and strategy when it comes to like resources and money and finances. And so whenever I'm thinking about liberation, I often think about it from a position of like structural and material realities, and how is it that I can then make strategic decisions about my investments as a way of liberating, and like both externally and internally. And one of the things that was really revolutionary for me was deciding that money was just another form of energy. And so that the money I take in and the money I give out is a reflection of the energy that I'm receiving and the energy that I'm putting out. And so for me, making decisions about what I invest in financially started to become mentally, what am I investing in energetically? What am I building? Because from a yogic perspective, you build what you direct your energy toward, right? And whatever grows is what you're putting your energy into, whether you're doing it intentionally or not, right? And so when I think of tips and tricks, I think about asking myself, what are my absolute values? What are the values I'm really just not willing to violate, right? And then how can I adjust my energy in a way that I'm putting the bulk of my energy behind the values that I really want to grow? And one of the most like visible ways to do that, and one of the most tangible ways to do that, is to think about what systems your money is building and what systems your money is growing into and helping grow. Whether you're just one cog in the machine or whether it's something that you have a lot more control over,
it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if you've got $5 in your savings account or if you've got $5,000 in your savings account, because it's not actually about how much money you have. It's about how you are perceiving your energy and how you are investing. And what happens, for me, it's not the argument that like you vote with your dollars. That's not really what I'm getting at. It's more that you start to see an internal shift, because what you're doing consistently when you change how you spend your money or who you give your money to or who you are willing to receive money from, you start to make decisions differently. And those decisions have a different vibration. And you really start to feel different, and you start to attune yourself to that vibration of truth. And you start to realize that you are going to shift your investments in favor of your purpose rather than away from your purpose. It's going to end up changing what relationships you end up in, like whether it's professional relationships, personal relationships, familial, romantic, etc. It's going to start to shift all of those things. And so it can be really helpful to have some kind of structure around that that's really rooted in values, knowing that your capacity is going to be different based on your socioeconomic circumstances. And that's been a really, really important tip and trick for myself. And that's part of why in 2021, I'm developing a course that is called, temporarily, at least we'll see if the name changes, it's called Cultivating Reverence. And it's going to be a course about divesting, but from a spiritual investment perspective. So like it's going to be training folks to learn how to divest from the actual structures and systems that cause us harm, but to do it in a way that's really spiritually directed and unique to your personal purpose. And that's going to involve like all of the structures, but also the spiritual practices that you need to be able to deal with whatever sensations arise when you start to shift how you move your energy in a material way, because it really does shift how you move your energy within your body as well.
I love that. I'm excited to see that course when it comes out. Speaking of courses, you have a course with Get Loved Up, and I would love for you to share a little bit about that and what people can look forward to in your course.
Yeah, absolutely. We did social justice as a radiant bliss practice, which is really exciting. Yogic connections to social justice. So kind of on the same like vibration, same framework that that moving towards social justice is also, it's a yogic practice. It's an inherently spiritual practice, right? Because it requires us to really look within and assess who it is that we want to be and assess how it is that we're going to be really effective. And being effective and sustainable in social justice absolutely requires that we're happy and that we experience bliss. And the only way we can experience that bliss sustainably is if we're really in alignment with our purpose. And so that's going to affect like how it is that you specifically show up for your causes and how it is that you show up for the world. Because it can be tempting to just show up generically in the way that you think you're supposed to, whether it's donating or going to a march or something like that. But in reality, we each are going to be more powerful if we show up in a way that's really in alignment with our personal power. And so that course is 4 different episodes, basically 4 different classes. And in each one, we explore the elements of yoga and the philosophies of yoga that allow us to understand all of those connections so that we can learn how to show up for social justice in a sustainable way and in a way that really enhances our own experience of bliss.
I love that. I love that. And what just came up for me is that when you're in bliss, you can be your best self.
Yes.
Best self. And what you talked about in that course, which I loved every single module, different layers of self.
Yes.
And you dive into that just a little bit, just to give them a little taste, like the different self and how to identify those.
Sure.
It's your time to step into your full power and potential. Are you tired of playing small and ready to make a big difference in the world? If your answer is yes, then the Wellness Entrepreneur Mastermind is for you. This mastermind will give you all the tools you need to turn your passion into purpose and live from a space of abundance as you let go of your limiting beliefs and negative self-talk. We coach you to thrive 1 week at a time, one goal at a time. We teach you what's working right now and what's not, so you can position yourself as a community leader and create real change in the world. If you're ready to level up and stand in your power, then go to koyawebb.com/mastermind to join our next group of wellness entrepreneurs. Space is limited and your time is now, so don't delay. Make a difference today.
In yoga, we call those different layers of experience, or the different layers of self, the 5 koshas. And I love the framework of the 5 koshas because I think every time anybody encounters them, they suddenly have this awareness of like, oh, duh, like I'm so much more than just what's outside of me, right? Like I'm so much more than this surface level, but we don't always have the words for it. And so in yoga, the koshas start from this outer layer called the Annamaya kosha and go all the way to the innermost layer, which is the most subtle layer, which is bliss. And so there's the physical layer, the energetic layer, the mental layer, the wisdom layer, and the bliss layer. And what's exciting about that is in this framework, bliss is untouchable, which means you can always access it. And it's just a matter of sort of learning how to move through those layers so that you can always tap into your bliss. And you realize that yoga is actually a bliss practice. You know, there are so many other spiritual practices that they can be kind of overwhelming because they really focus on suffering or sin or things like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for people who are maybe looking for a bit more of like an abundance oriented approach, it can be really healing to know that that bliss is your birthright and to operate from that place and to focus on this belief that like you're allowed to be happy, that you're allowed to be whole, and you're allowed to orient your life around that fact, right? And then you start to really understand how things feel in your body differently because you can see them in terms of those layers, and you can ask yourself things like, okay, well, how am I feeling energetically? And how is that impacting my mind and my thoughts and vice versa? And how is that impacting my body? And how are all of those things working together to impact my beliefs? Right? And then how are those beliefs maybe preventing me or helping me experience bliss, depending on what they are? And it's such a useful framework because, you know, it helps us love ourselves, but it also helps us understand that social justice has to be about making sure that everybody has the right to access their bliss.
Right?
That's
so very powerful. And bliss, I just have to repeat what you said. Bliss is your birthright. You said bliss is like yogic practice, but I also think it's a life practice too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bliss is like a life practice. Like, how can we find our bliss even in challenging times, even in hard times, going through all the layers, seeing what is affecting my bliss, because if bliss is my birthright, that's who I am.
Yes.
And you use bliss, I use the word, if love is my birthright, and that's who I am, like, how can I return to myself? How can I return to bliss? How can I return to love?
Yeah.
I feel like some of the things you said before about liberation is very much in alignment with that. And I know a lot of people listening might be thinking, but I have this going on in my life and this, and I lost my job and I lost my person. And how do you go through the layers of returning to that bliss?
You know, in my experience, it's about ritual. Like ritual in yoga, we use the term practice. It's a practice. You always come back to your practice because faith is developed by really remembering what it feels like in each of those layers. So when you come back to your meditation practice or your asana practice or things like that, that's where you're building that muscle memory of love. That's where you're building that muscle memory of compassion and forgiveness. And that's where you're learning to create space for every part of yourself. And so it's really helpful to have practices or rituals that you come to that are always available to you. Make them simple, right? So that even if you lose your job, even if you have a breakup, these are things that you almost start to resort to habitually, right? That you start to do even without thinking about them, and they will start to tap you back into this muscle memory of bliss and joy, whether that's lighting a candle, whether that is saying a prayer or an affirmation, whether that's doing a physical practice, or whether that's connecting with your spirit guides or your ancestors, or whether that's tapping into community care as well. Because I always say that self-care is only as valuable as community care, right? Ultimately, we need people and we need to feel as though we are protected and loved and cared for. We can't do all of that by ourselves, right? And so it's not to say that you're downplaying any grief or pain, or that you're not making space for that. Something that helped me think about it was this idea that the heart is actually infinite. And so I think I often thought of the heart as finite. So if I was feeling pain or grief, then I had this binary understanding that there wasn't also room in my heart for joy and bliss and love, that I kind of had to pick between one or the other. And then when I had these visuals of the heart being infinite, I realized I could feel the grief and the pain and the love and the joy and all of that at the same time, that my heart actually has the space to contain all of it simultaneously. And neither one necessarily needs to dominate. So it's not necessarily about always feeling happy, right? It's more about knowing that you can always return to that joy when you're ready, right? Because otherwise there's this feeling that joy is out of reach at it. And that can lead to all types of disorienting feelings. You know, it can make you feel helpless. It can make you feel hopeless. It can make you feel depressed or anxious. But when you realize that it's still there, you're just not 100% focused on it right now, then you realize how temporary the grief and the pain can be.
Absolutely.
Right? Even when they're really intense, they may last for a long time, but you know that it's going to end, or it's going to slowly become less intense. And then that joy is going to take up more and more and more space. It's more about believing that it's there, having faith that it's there. And that's why we practice, because the more we do these ritualized behaviors, whether it's doing the same asana practice every week or going to the same community every week, the more we communicate to our bodies and ourselves at every layer of experience that we are whole, that we have the right to be loved and joyful.
Absolutely. I think that is so powerful, so profound, so necessary for people to understand. And I was with my niece, so I watched a lot of movies, but I saw this movie Inside Out. I don't know if you saw that one.
Yeah.
It was about, how all of our emotions are valid. And that's part of the human experience. And to acknowledge, and in acknowledging those different emotions, we can see, where we need to express, where we to show up. And I think it's such a beautiful, it was such a beautiful piece, especially for children and adults alike, to realize all of our emotions are valid and there's room for it all. But like you said, joy is always there. Bliss is always there. Love is always there for you to return to, choose. And it is your birthright to turn and draw from that space. And I wanted to talk a little bit about community. I know community is important to you. As you said, when you're working on self, you work on self, and knowing that self and the health of self is part of health for your community. So when you have you done to really nurture your community? I see you online all the time. Haven't seen you in person in a while, but classes and outreach. So can you share a little bit about your passion to build community and what that means to you?
Yeah. Community is so key, especially if you have any experience of marginalization, right? Whether you're a woman or you're Black or you're Indigenous or queer or disabled or anything where you don't necessarily feel like the whole world can be your community, right? Seeking out community that is going to help you tap back into that sense of bliss and wholeness is so important. And so it was really important for me to cultivate spaces in which people like me could feel like they were in a community, right? In which people would feel like they could show up fully and not necessarily have to explain themselves. And I think a lot of people, I often say the work I do is not diversity and inclusion work. And I think people hear that at first and get a little confused. They're like, don't you want diversity? And I'm like, of course I do. But diversity and inclusion work is often about taking an existing space that's exclusive, right? And in trying to insert people into that space without necessarily changing the foundations of that space very much, right? And so I decided that's not what I wanted to do. Instead, I wanted to build communities from scratch that were always designed to include people, that were brave spaces, that allow for people to have varying opinions, but also for there to be just this real foundation of respect and this real foundation of compassion and concern for the people in the space. And so the way that I show up in community, I think, has even more of an impact than I realize sometimes. Just showing up as myself draws a lot of people to me who have never had a Black teacher or a queer teacher or a trans teacher or all of the above. And really setting those spaces up so that setting the community up so that we're able to both challenge ourselves and love ourselves and to really operate in that space where we're touching on every single one of those layers, right? So my classes are never just asana, right? They're never just physical. We also will talk about what it really means at a philosophical level to be breathing and practicing yoga and to develop ritual and what habits it is that we are looking to reorient by doing a particular practice or creating a different or particular energy in our bodies. And yeah, I really like the engagement. I'm finding some places are really, like online in particular, are less engaging than other places. So I started a Patreon because I feel like people are a little Instagrammed out, zoomed out in 2020, and there's a little bit more of a personal investment on something like Patreon. So I found that like having 13 people, I'll get more engagement than having 2,000 people, right? And so I am even still rethinking what community looks like and how I want to invest. Like, where do I want to put my energy and what do I really want community to feel like and look like? And I'm getting better at making that, I think, even more homey, even more cozy. So that I mean, you know this, it takes an enormous amount of our energy to create these communities and create these spaces. And it's kind of a bummer when people are like not very participatory, right? And because then it almost feels like you're speaking into a void. And so it's really nice to be in spaces where people want to share and they want to show up and ask questions. And so I've been really rethinking what that looks like. And I now have a few monthly classes. I've sort of shifted from the monthly class instead of a weekly class. That way I still have a public class every week, but each one has a little bit of a different intention so that you can come each time, but still feel like a different aspect of yourself is being tended to, right? And so I have community energy circles, which are a lot more rooted in the idea that we each have our own energy practices, and that if we come together, we can amplify each other's practices. So it's a lot more equitable and everybody can show up in a way that feels right for them, but they can still receive guidance if they need it or if they're brand new. And I also started a class that is about using yoga to dissolve these binary thinking, the way that we think in binaries in our minds. And I found that people are really benefiting from that because we all have so many binaries in our minds, whether it's as simple as right and wrong or good and bad. And that when we start to become a little bit more fluid in that thinking, building community automatically becomes easier because we are a lot more open to who it is we're allowing to be in our communities and who it is we're allowing ourselves to be vulnerable with and around, and who it is we're willing to sort of be expansive with and expand with rather than, hide away from. And so when I take that approach, I find that my communities naturally become very diverse. They become very brave. And they're very inclusive because the people who are there want to be vulnerable and they want to learn from their peers and they want to share in a respectful way. And it's just really beautiful. Yeah.
Have you gotten on there's a new app, Clubhouse. Have you heard
about it? But I'm not on it yet.
So talk about conversations. I think an alert pops up and if I click on it, I'm automatically like tossed into this conversation. Wow. I was tossed into this conversation on relationship. I was like, whoa, and it was intense. And then I swiped or did something and I was tossed and talk about deep, active conversations. I'm blown away currently. So I don't know where it'll be next month, next year. Right. You know how quickly things transition here, but I definitely thought of that initially when you said about that safe space to express and to share and to listen and to vocalize. That's what I felt in that room. I was like, whoa, people are really feeling like they can vocalize and be heard, talk about some of these taboo topics. And I was very impressed. It was almost like a live podcast where multiple speakers could like grab the mic and tune in. And I think the room I went into was like close to 400 people. Wow. So it was very interesting. And I agree with what you said about just once you create that container and you being that person that's creating that container of safety and of openness. And I think that's so important. And I think it's beautiful that different spaces are becoming more inclusive. But I also must acknowledge what you said. Sometimes if the root foundation of that space doesn't change, even if people have good intentions, the impact is still going to be a traumatic one for people who are marginalized. And I think that's very beautiful. And I feel like that's what I try to do with my community as well. Get loved up is create a container that is daily when we see these things that are harmful, just eliminating them with no questions asked, like, oh, that's toxic. And I've been thinking that way since birth. So let me get rid of it and let me do something that's more mindful. And I think that's what we all have to do as love beings, as you said, not just for our personal, but also for our family and for our communities,
Yes.
really reflect and ask those questions. Is what I'm doing in alignment with self-love? Is what I'm doing in alignment with oneness and loving others and social justice? What I'm doing in alignment with love for my world?
Right.
And when we can come back to those questions and ask, is what I'm doing in alignment, we can really make that choice to be in alignment with the bliss, with the love, or with something outside of it. So thank you so much for bringing so many beautiful topics and giving us so much inspiration. So we're going to have a quick little lightning round that I love to do, and just ask you some of your favorite things.
Okay.
So, favorite color?
Sage green.
Ooh. Favorite book?
The Courage to Be Disliked.
I have to put that on my list. Favorite movie?
Oh, I don't know if this is my favorite, but top 5 is Love Actually.
Favorite person?
Myself.
How did I know you were going to say that? So beautiful, so beautiful, so very, very beautiful. And now I just want to ask, is there anything else that you want to share with the community that's on your heart and soul?
Give yourself grace, right? Make sure you're extending that same compassion to yourself as you are to other people. Boundaries are revolutionary. Learn how to set them and stick to them and honor them. It's a big part of honoring yourself and aligning your purpose. And I'd love to meet you. I'd love to spend time with you. I'd love for you to be a part of the communities that I am building. There's a ton of opportunities to do that. So yeah, if you're looking to just sort of dive in to yourself and have that dive be an echo of goodness, right? That sort of naturally breaks down the structures of oppression that I'd really, really love to be in your world.
I love that. And I'm so happy to have you in my world. If y'all want to see Zell she has a Get Loved Up course about bliss, social justice as a radiant bliss practice that you can dive into. And where can people find you? Your website, your social handle, where they can come.
Yeah. So my website is restinpower.yoga. And then my company name or my practice name is Rest in Power Yoga and Reiki. And my Patreon is patreon.com/restinpower. Instagram @restinpoweryogareiki. As you've mentioned, I changed my name just recently to Isazela Amanzi. And so you may see, you'll see in the Get Loved Up course, I'm going by my birth name. And so it's interesting to see how in different places online, I'm going to just sort of be operating in different periods of time. But yeah, you can always join on my website. There's a free mini e-course called the Heart Healing and Clarity of Purpose mini e-course. And it provides meditation and breath work, and then a journal structure for creating your own purpose statement. So if you were wondering how it is that you're going to figure out what your purpose is, there's a free opportunity for you to do that on my website, and it's forever free. And then you can see my schedule of classes on my website as well. And I've got an upcoming workshop in January. Well, this won't be live on January. It's going to happen a few times in 2021. I've got a workshop called Radical Realignment that will also help you go through the process of finding your purpose statement, which is one way for you to just sort of test out whether or not you'd like to spend time with me. All my classes are sliding scale as well. So they start at $1.11 for the weekly classes, up to $22.22. So whatever your circumstances are, I hope that you feel like investing in yourself is accessible. And then if you're looking to invest at a bigger level in terms of maybe stepping into your power as an energy worker or a healer, And I also have Reiki certifications throughout 2021 that you can join in. They're going to be 2-month-long immersions, sacred energy immersions that really tap into all of the things that we've talked about today, and are a great way for you to start to integrate things into your daily life so that you can feel more in alignment.
I'm looking forward to the Reiki sessions. I know it's in alignment with me. It's just about the timing and when it happen, but I'm excited to really dive into more energy work. I found the more that I dive into the energy work, the more I can understand myself, and then understand myself, the more I can understand others and how we, again, return to bliss. So thank you so much for joining me. I adore you. I appreciate you. So happy you came on here. And community, until next time, get loved up, love yourself, love others, and love the world one day at a time, one breath at a time. Peace and love.
I just want to take a moment to say thank you for being part of the Get Loved Up community. I like to share topics and people making a positive impact in the world, and your feedback means the world to me. If you haven't already left a review, please leave a 5-star review and let me know what you want to hear more of on the show. I'm here for you, and together we're making the world a better place, one day at a time, one show at a time. Thank you for listening.